Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with host Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
Hey, good to be back. So we have a hot topic for this week, and this isn't particularly one that I was excited to talk about, but I think it's one that we need to talk about. There's a lot going on in the news, and I think probably a lot of survivors are feeling really uneasy, and I want to address some of those things in this podcast because, boy, the Southern Baptist Church, they just keep getting foul balls. Anyway, let's just jump right in. I wanted to talk about the rollout of the new, the new Caring Well campaign. And this is not to knock that. I actually started going through it. They just released it. I think it was yesterday. Let's see, or the 27th, I think, is when they unrolled that of August. Anyway, everybody knows that the Southern Baptist got all these experts together, and, Rachel Denhollander, of course, she, I have the highest respect for her, and I think, so many people do, and they should. I think she's great to have on that team. They have Diane Langberg. I think she's great for being on that team. Some of the others I don't know real well, but I think it's a good team. I think it's solid, for the most part, from what I know. The thing that becomes problematic, though, is that I can't help shake this feeling that the Southern Baptist Church, based on their actions, are completely trying to get ahead of this, and they're starting to self-destruct. From the very top of leadership. I don't buy yet that the leadership is behind this. I really don't. I think they were forced into this. This is just my opinion.
Okay, Jimmy, by this, what are you talking about?
By doing this campaign, by saying...
That's what I wanted you to clarify in case people were not understanding.
Yeah, I had done...
this.
I think you remember when I did that. It was a really short interview, but I did it with CBN News. And I was asked about J.D. Greer, and that was back when he gave his 10 recommendations for the Southern Baptist Church.
And I do remember that clearly.
And my point was, I wish, I don't know J.D. Greer personally. I've never met him. I've never spoken with him. In all fairness, I've never tried to reach out to him. So I want to make that full disclosure. But this is just based on observation. So I don't know him from any other person walking down the sidewalk.
Right. Okay.
What I do know is that Ashley Easter, who's a good friend of mine, and I think she just does a tremendous job educating people, and I'm speaking at the Courage Conference that she's putting on down in Orlando. I appreciate Ashley a lot. She has been trying for a long time to talk to J.D. Greer personally. This was way before the Southern Baptist Convention happened this year. Ashley tried to personally make an appointment. She lives in the same town as J.D. Greer. She tried to make an appointment with him several times and was actually promised an appointment. And she showed up to the church, and J.D. Greer wouldn't come out and talk with her. He sent one of his employees or coworkers or somebody out to talk to her. But, she basically was just patted on the head,
shifted to the side, and the message that sends is loud and clear.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I understand being busy. I get it. All of us are busy. I totally get it. And I think he's far busier than any of us are.
However...
right, when you make an appointment with somebody. Right, and Ashley's not somebody who's just, some little squeaky mouse out here who's trying to cause ripples. Ashley genuinely wants to see change.
Pretty important, meeting.
Yeah.
Would have been.
So, I made the point in that interview with CBN News, and if I find that interview, I'll link to that in the description of this podcast, of this episode. I made the point that I wish J.D. Greer was a little bit more honest, because he seemed really surprised by these bombshell reports about all these cover-ups in the Southern Baptist Church. And I said, he's known about these for a long time. And I know I had talked to Ashley right before I did that interview because I wanted to have my facts straight. So, I wanted to confirm. I thought I remembered her talking about that meeting, and, I didn't really know a timeline or anything like that. So I personally called Ashley, I don't know, probably 15 minutes before I did that interview. And she confirmed, and she said, yes, I did, in fact, attempt to make an appointment with Dr. Greer. And she said not only that, she ran into him at a Starbucks in her town. And she walked up to him, and she said he knows exactly who I am. And she said, hey, nice running into you. And I know our meeting didn't happen, but she said, if you'd like to schedule another one, I'm available. And he just brushed her off and walked out.
I remember you and I discussing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, my point is, there are just so many factors to this that I can't help. And this may not be the case. So I'm not saying this is fact. This is just my opinion. This is like our opinion podcast today. But it's fresh on our heart, and I want to look at the evidence. But my opinion is that it feels like they're standing behind this team of experts at the Caring Well campaign to make it look as if they're being proactive when they're really not. And if you remember the Southern Baptist Convention, there was the For Such a Time as This rally. And, I spoke to the organizers of that event and actually wrote a blog post about it. I did my homework for that. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it. So I did a video from afar and sent that in. But the rally organizers were told that they weren't allowed to be inside of the convention center.
I think we did a podcast that mentioned all of that.
Right.
We actually talked about that
so
in depth.
Not only that, they were shoved on this little back sidewalk that they had this one little corner, and they said it was beside dumpsters.
Right.
And it was right on the street. It was a bus pull-off place. So they had all these buses sitting there idling right in front of them. So they had all the fumes from the buses and the dumpsters.
Another message.
Yeah, that you're trash. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, out of all the places, they were told that was the only spot they were allowed to stand.
Yeah.
This was a huge convention center in Birmingham. So it's just, it's one thing after the other. And at first I was like, well, maybe we should give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they're just naive. Maybe they just, don't really know. They're kind of getting in a groove. They're getting a feel for this. But then I look at what happened this week, and I'm mortified. I'm literally mortified for abuse survivors. So I'll talk about that here in a second. But, I want to make it clear, first of all, that I'm not trying to undermine at all the work that this team is doing for the Caring Well campaign. And they also have a Caring Well conference that's coming up in October. I know Rachel Denhollander is speaking there. Boz Chividjian is speaking there. And I admire them. I respect them. And there are other speakers there who I admire and I respect. And I think, given the chance to speak, they should do it. Like, I don't think to avoid that is the right answer, but there's this double-edged sword because I just keep getting the feeling that the SBC is really inactive, and they want to remain inactive. And so they want to have these big speakers come and hope that they're going to pacify them. And, you know, I know Boz, and Boz doesn't pacify anybody. And Rachel doesn't pacify anybody. Like, they will speak truth. Right. I have no question about that whatsoever. And the SBC may be pretty surprised by that. But it's just all these things, you know.
And Jimmy,
I can't shake this feeling.
In the context of what all is happening, it's not that unusual for something like this to happen. I mean, it happens all the time. When you get somebody to put on a false facade for you. And again, this is our opinion based on what we're seeing. But, and you know, we will not know truly until more of this unfolds what really is happening.
Well, I think, okay, I'm going to read from this Snap article. So Snap put an article out. I don't even know what today's date is.
I don't either. When you said the 28th, I'm afraid I missed
we're recording
a birthday.
Yeah, today's the 28th.
Okay. It's I have a granddaughter who has a birthday today, and I never acknowledged it. Paige.
Oh, well. Yeah. Boy, you're a bad grandma.
Happy birthday, Paige. Oh, boy. Tomorrow's Jonathan, and the 30th is Devin. So, I podcasted my birthday. Sorry, kids.
So,
go ahead, Jimmy.
Okay, so this was published yesterday, August 27th. This is Snap responding. Okay, here's the title of the article. SBC rolls out new, quote-unquote, new prevention campaign. Snap responds. I'm just going to read this. It's not that long of an article, and I think it's pretty telling. 6 months after a massive expose into cases of sexual violence and cover-up within the Southern Baptist Convention was published, church leaders have finally responded. Unfortunately, we feel that this response amounts to little more than public relations effort. SBC leaders unveiled their new Caring Well campaign today, which was yesterday, a prevention effort focused on creating new teams and processes for churches in order to create safer environments within SBC churches. According to the Caring Well website, this campaign involves educating pastors about the importance of using secular law enforcement professionals to investigate crimes and how to respond ethically, legally, and with good shepherding when abuse is discovered. But while the campaign seems good on its face, there's no apparent mechanism to require churches to participate in or otherwise follow the guidelines that have been rolled out today. Similarly, this campaign does not include many of the asks that survivors had made of the SBC at this year's For Such a Time as This rally, including the creation of a national database of offenders or a requirement for SBC leadership to immediately remove churches that cover up abuse from the convention. Based on the information that has been shared today, the announcement of this campaign harkens back to the 2007-2008 SBC annual meetings, where abuse was loudly and publicly decried, but privately and institutionally ignored. Any effort that aims at institutional change should also mandate participation and have mechanisms in place to force participation. Instead, this campaign is a volunteer call to action backed upon only by a simple ask to the SBC churches for participation. We can only assume that the churches in which this campaign is most needed will also be the places least likely to get involved. That's a powerful statement.
Yeah, it is.
And that's very true.
Yeah,
so
right.
The churches that are doing the covering up, you think they're going to be like, oh, I'll voluntarily go through this curriculum?
No.
Not a chance in the world.
Of course not.
I've consulted with enough churches to know when you have resistance to reporting abusers, they'll defend their reasoning behind that to the very end. They're not going to say, oh my goodness, what have we done? We need to learn more. they're going to say, well, don't you believe in God's grace? Don't you believe in forgiveness?
Yeah.
Don't you believe in second chances? What about your sins?
This is such a fireball, I guess we'll call it, that is about to explode.
Mm-hmm.
It really, really is. I think we're going to see some very interesting things happen in the next several weeks. I really do. And the squiggle is, if that's a word, is happening already. The squeeze is being put on. And I think that article was really right on target with what they're predicting will happen.
Yeah.
Really.
I do too.
Yeah.
Well, I found this to be interesting. So, Tiffany Thigpen is, she's a friend of mine. She's a friend of this podcast. She was abused by, Gilliard back in the 90s. And Gilliard had so many victims and actually spent time in prison, for child abuse. And Paige Patterson went out of his way to defend Gilliard and called him, he's like, the son of mine that I love. And I'm just so deeply hurt by these accusations. And, he's such a good man and a man of good character, and God forgives people. And so we need to give him a second chance. And this was after droves of women and children came forward.
Once again,
Tiffany being one of them.
Right. And once again, we had a whole podcast on that.
Mm-hmm.
So if people are just catching up, you're going to, when you go back and listen to some of this isn't just new that was exposed. This has been.
No, it's been going on for a long time.
Going on, right.
But what's interesting is Paige Patterson radically defended him, I mean, even until recently. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure that Gilliard is preaching again. These guys just keep resurfacing. They get out of prison. They go back into the ministry. My question is, where's the SBC on this? This is a high-profile case.
I am just shaking my head as I
it's
told
unreal.
You before
you
we
wouldn't
started.
believe it unless you witnessed it.
I really have a tough time understanding any of it.
Yeah.
I really do.
But none of these leaders are speaking out against this. In fact, it gets worse. So Tiffany spoke to Paige Patterson years ago and was belittled. Paige Patterson just ripped into her and, talked down to her. And we ought to have Tiffany on as a guest and let her tell her story. But Paige Patterson just treated her really, really poorly. And eventually he was fired. Last year he was fired, finally. And I think they took his retirement away or something like that. But what's frustrating about this is these victims have been speaking up for a long, long time. Krista Brown, she's another one. She's been speaking out for years. For decades, she's been speaking out. And they've all been ignored. Ashley Easter, she's been speaking out for years. And so what do they do? How do they respond? Oh my goodness, we're having a Caring Well curriculum and a Caring Well conference, and so all is good. But in the meantime, this was 5 days ago. There was a bombshell Houston Chronicle report by Rob Downen, and Rob has just done a phenomenal job of covering abuse in the Southern Baptist Church. This bombshell article comes out, is published in the Houston Chronicle, where Rob uncovered these videotapes from the 90s, where they're all sitting around talking about Gilliard. They all knew about it.
Right.
And they're talking about covering it up.
Right.
This was not a surprise to them.
Right.
They knew that he was abusing multiple children and women. They knew it. And they passed him from church to church. So Paige Patterson, he's on video. So there are all these videos that surface. Okay, this has a point. This is going somewhere. So Russel Moore, the same day, it was either the same day or the day after the Houston Chronicle report, he comes up and publishes this video on Twitter And the tweet's right in front of me right here. Russel Moore, 5 days ago. It says, deep fake technology is here, and it's only getting more sophisticated. But how should we think about truth if we can't even trust our eyes and ears? I talk about this in this week's One Thing You Missed. So it's this video. I watched the entire video. And he's talking about deep fake technology and he uses it in the context of, in the past, a video from many, many years ago might resurface. And it looks like the person speaking, and it sounds like the person speaking, but in reality, technology has advanced, and those are doctored videos. And so his whole post was about, what should we do about that? Well, Tiffany, rightfully so, retweeted that and came unglued. Right. And she was like, you have not once, Russel Moore has not once denounced Gilliard, Tiffany's abuser. This bombshell Houston Chronicle article comes out, and this cannot be coincidence.
Oh,
and even if we give Russel Moore, who is the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, the public policy arm of the Southern Baptist Convention, he's in charge of all of that. Even if we give him the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, he's just incredibly ignorant, which is frightening if he's that ignorant.
Yeah.
If we give him the benefit of the doubt, the timing of that video is at very least highly insensitive. Highly insensitive.
It's cruel.
And cruel.
It's cruel, Jimmy. It's worse than insensitive. All of this is. It's a slap against a slap against a slap. It's just...
but Tiffany was tagging him. She was tagging Russel Moore in these videos. And I think, one of the things that I wrote about when the For Such a Time as This rally was at the Southern Baptist Convention, Russel Moore never walked down the sidewalk to greet them.
I wonder why.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
No, you can't. And I still think that when light is exposed, when truth is exposed, you are going to have those who have hidden the truth, who have covered it in darkness. They're going to squirm and wiggle and make so many errors in trying to keep the cover up that eventually they do self-destruct. And it's happening. We'll see it. It'll play out, but it's painful watching it, and it hurts so many people along the way.
Well, how about what Al Mohler said? So Al Mohler is the president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, so he ought to be sensitive, right?
Ought
there have
to
been,
be.
I mean, bombshell report after bombshell report after bombshell report exposing cover-ups, active cover-ups in the Southern Baptist Church. So Al Mohler, president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, you would think would have a little bit of sensitivity, right? He tweets this yesterday. This is a tweet. I just pulled it up. He says, Americans are basically, by the millions, giving up on the fact that to be human is to be a parent. Eventually, to take on that responsibility to get married and to have children, to take on the responsibility of passing on civilization itself. So, his message, Americans by the millions are giving up on the fact that to be human is to be a parent. Kelly Downing, she is a friend and a patron of this podcast and an abuse survivor, an incredible abuse survivor, which, by the way, I got to put a plug in for Kelly's new podcast. Today, she just published episode 3. She just started up a new podcast, which is incredible. But Kelly retweeted Al Mohler's tweet, and she said, you know who didn't give up on marriage? The good Baptist pedophile who abused me and other little girls, decimating our ability to thrive in relationships. Like a dutiful Christian, he's married and has 2 beautiful children. What does that feel like? I often wonder. That breaks my heart.
It
Like the insensitivity of these guys is astounding.
Feel sick. And I have to question even when I first read what he tweeted, honestly, Jimmy, did I not look at you and say, what is
you gasped
that?
When you read it, when you read it, you
cannot
gasped.
believe it yet that he wrote that. Talk about insensitive. Talk about where is it intentional?
Listen,
you have to wonder sometimes how far evil goes.
I am
really do.
Okay. You know I'm a talker.
A little bit.
So, but listen to the amount of hours. I teach class Sunday morning.
Right.
I preach Sundays, every Sunday. I speak on this podcast once a week.
Right.
Constantly meet with church members every single day.
Right.
I'm with people. Right. I'm meeting with people, talking with people. One time I counted up the amount of hours just in the 10 years that I've been preaching at the church where I'm at now, and I forget what it was. It was unreal, the amount of talking hours. So listen, if anybody has any grace for times when we misspeak, I mean, I'm like the captain of speaking off the cuff and, saying things that didn't really come out right the way that I meant it to sound. Like that happens.
It does.
When you're out there in the public, when you're speaking a lot, when you're teaching a lot, when you're thinking a lot, processing a lot, you're going to misspeak. It's going to happen.
Right.
But what's incredible to me is the timing of these posts, and they seem so intentional. You can't tell me that Al Mohler tweeted this out yesterday and was like, here's a good tweet. I'm going to talk about how Americans are idiots and that they're not human because they don't become parents. And Kelly wrote this was just a couple hours ago. She retweeted it again. So clearly this struck a nerve. And she says, but will Jesus still love me if I'm, quote unquote, trying to be a real human? Please let me know, because I could save so much money by deleting all these dating apps.
That's just sad.
It's tragic.
It is sad. That's all.
Like the insensitivity. Like, why don't these guys just stop tweeting? Just stop it. Right. Just like, if you're that ignorant,
just keep quiet. And don't say anything.
And it's not like they don't know. Like I went on Al Mohler's tweet. Okay, when you go on the actual tweet that he tweeted out, let me read some of these responses. We only have a couple minutes here, but let me read some of these responses. He can't not know. Right. It's not like he tweeted this and he's unaware.
Jimmy.
Listen to the comments. I haven't screened these, so I have no idea what I might slip a couple cuss words in there, but just because I haven't screened them.
Insert mother rolling her eyes.
Okay, here's one. I have so many thoughts when I read this statement, but my first one is, my father had 8 children, and he's one of the most inhumane people I know. He's now the patriarch of generational toxicity to 28 grandchildren and 26 great-grandchildren. Okay, that's one tweet. Here's another one. Here's another reply. When your tweets get flack from other devout Christians, you know you ought to delete it. It's not working very well, Al. Christian marriages are known for the severity of abuse. Maybe you should point us to a loving and serving Jesus and putting him first over marriage until you figure out how to stop the abuse. And on and on. I mean, there are just dozens of responses here. I've not read one positive response. Dozens of them. And he doesn't delete the tweet. He leaves it up there. These guys are unreal.
And that, to me, again, speaks volumes.
Yeah.
What's it say? It says, I stand by what I
wrote.
Well,
let me tell you something else. I mean, that's right. So this is important. I had, man, it's been a long time since I deleted a post. It's rare that I delete a post, not because I don't offend people, but when I do offend people, especially survivors.
Right.
I will first issue an apology.
Right.
I'll say, I'm so sorry that, that this offended you.
Mm-hmm.
And I will take this tweet down. And you can, any of you listeners who have ever seen that happen from me, I promise you, if I do anything where a survivor feels like it was insensitive or I just didn't think through it enough, I will happily delete it.
I think you said something critical there. Think through it enough before you put anything out like that. There's a great deal of thinking. You're not just sitting there splashing a tweet or splashing a podcast.
Oh, I go days without writing a tweet or a Facebook post.
Blog post. Because you're thinking through every aspect.
Every word is important.
Right. This, I have to think, was thought through. It was intentional.
It sounds, you almost have to come to that conclusion. And I don't know. I mean, again, to give... If he's aware of the responses, like you said, apologize or at least he is aware of the responses.
I know.
Unless he's not reading a single one of his comments.
He's got to have people around him who are reading and are going to say, hey.
And it's like they just double down on this. So, for me, again, this is just an opinion podcast, but I can't take these guys seriously. I can't do it. And I can't sit there and applaud them and say, oh my goodness, they're all for changing the culture.
Ignorant? Can people still be
even if they are
ignorant?
There are people tapping them on the shoulder telling them, hey, this post is they're survivors of abuse. That's the most important part. There are survivors of abuse who are saying, my God, you are hurting me by posting this. And they leave these up there and they don't issue apologies. They don't address the real issue, which is abuse. I know, I'm dumbfounded.
I shake my head.
But here's the point. Okay, I don't want to depress you and leave our listeners. Here's the point. You survivors, by speaking your truth and by shouting it from the rooftops and by saying, this is what happened to me, you guys have these guys backed into this corner where I think they're just self-destructing. They're trying so hard to be, to sound important, to sound like they care, to sound like, oh my goodness, we're changing the culture. They're trying so hard and you can't fake it. You cannot fake your support for abuse survivors. You cannot fake it.
No.
And these guys, their true colors are coming out, and I think they're self-destructing.
They're
now,
not
again,
pretty
this is
colors
opinion.
I
don't know.
Right.
I don't know Al Mohler.
Happen.
I don't know Russel Moore. But these guys, their tweets are so insensitive. Yeah. They're so insensitive.
Yeah, and they tell so much. You talked about the tells of a predator last week. These are some tells. And if we pay attention to these tells, we're going to pretty soon be able to compose a different picture of what they're presenting.
So we'll leave you with this truth bomb. Our truth bomb is that you haven't even begun to see the amount of self-destruction that's going to happen. And I think that's a good thing. There needs to be a cleansing before there can be a building. I'm telling you, we haven't even seen the beginning. And you survivors, by being bold and being strong, are flushing out the people who are insensitive and who don't care. So keep it up. There's so much more that's going to be uncovered. And you survivors are the ones who are creating this simply by shining a light and speaking your truth. We love you guys. And man, you rock. So keep it up. That is it for this episode. We'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. Thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcast, or Stitcher. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron. And check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.